Welcome to the Whiskey Congress. Honest, open talk dedicated to speaking the truth to those who are open to hearing it. Black, white, right, left. Most importantly, honest, bold, and fueled by good whiskey. In Whiskey Veritas, we are Whiskey Congress. Join the evolution.
Whiskey Congress is back in session. Stephen and I are together in the Cleveland studio. Full disclosure, Stephen and I had lunch together, and I've had a bit to drink. So if it sounds like that at some point, you did not. I did. All right.
I'll carry us. It'll be okay.
Thank you very much. All right. So on that note, you put together the whiteboard. Started with Trump suing Michael Cohen for $500 million that Michael Cohen obviously doesn't have, but.
Well, the amount of money is ridiculous, right? But once you get past that, you have, I've said for the longest time now that just kind of let Trump keep talking, and he's gonna talk himself into more shit, right? And get himself into trouble. Like the guy just can't shut up, and he's got so many skeletons in his closet that it all starts to get caught up in this cyclone. And by him suing Michael Cohen, right, what he's doing is, so he's saying that Michael Cohen basically broke attorney-client privilege.
All right.
But he's also saying that what Michael Cohen said or is saying is false. So if what Michael Cohen is saying is false, then he couldn't be breaking attorney-client privilege. Right? And if it was false, then Trump would be suing for defamation. He wouldn't be suing because Michael Cohen broke attorney-client privilege. So if you are alleging that Michael Cohen broke attorney-client privilege, then you're acknowledging that what Michael Cohen is saying is true. And if what Michael Cohen is saying is true, then you committed a crime, and attorney-client privilege no longer applies. Right? So, this suit, right, is going to open up all sorts of discovery, and it's going to bring to light even more. Now, a lot of this stuff I have to imagine that some DA somewhere already has, with all the different entanglements that Trump has going on. But it's just going to bring more to light. And I think that this issue with Michael Cohen, by him suing, if Trump doesn't get himself out of this, right, and drop the suit, and this goes to discovery, and Michael Cohen is able to say, look, on this date, Trump said this regarding this, and it proves that Cohen isn't lying, right? Even if it means that in this particular case that it would acknowledge that Trump's allegation is technically true. He did break attorney-client privilege, but again, when you, the client,
commission of a crime,
right? And you involve said counsel. Well, then the whole attorney-client privilege thing goes out the door, and Trump just basically stepped in a giant pile of shit that he made.
So let me ask this from a layman perspective. By making this a lawsuit, he is now basically opening the door for anything that gets said to be legally binding, meaning potentially perjury.
Well, kind of, sort of, right? It depends. Not quite perjury, right? But they're going to be pulling, transcripts from depositions. They're going to be pulling, whatever sort of documentation. If there are recordings between Cohen and Trump, or phone conversations, emails, text exchange, all that sort of stuff. It pulls it all out into the open. So it's not as much about perjury. But, Trump has other cases in the state of New York going on, right? That's the other dumb thing. You just got all these charges for campaign finance issues, right? Michael Cohen is a witness in these cases, right? So then you sue Michael Cohen basically to shut him up in the state in which you are facing charges. So it's not going to be a big leap for Alvin Bragg to go over to the civil judge who's handling this case and hey, let's move this information back and forth because that's privy to the state's case against Donald Trump. So that, like, what he did, it's not so much perjury, right? Now, if he were to get on the stand and testify with the criminal charges, but those can be proven to be false statements based off of what he's saying or what's admitted to in the civil case, then yes. But as of right now, no. It's just the information that they'll have access to that jeopardizes Trump's criminal case, even though it may help fortify his civil case. But the civil case on its face cannot stand if the information that Michael Cohen had was true. Right, like you see what I'm saying?
No, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So Alvin Bragg is a funny situation because the Trump group wants to say, okay, he's doing this based on a political agenda of bias.
Because he's funded by George Soros.
Right. Well, the George Soros thing, I mean, people don't even know who George Soros is, to be honest with you. But, to a degree, Bragg did say, like, I will do this. And then he did it.
He campaigned
and by the way, it's following the law.
Right. I mean, he campaigned like, look, it looks like Trump is dirty, and he's done some very blatant and abashed things. So I'm going to go after him and bring him to justice. Okay. Like there is some political aspect and a lot. Like Letitia James did the same sort of thing, and that is problematic. Like I think any objective, even whether you're a partisan or an attorney looking at that. It raises an eyebrow when you're campaigning for a position that you can, you have the ability to take away a person's freedom, and you're saying, I want this job so I can go get that person, right? And that person is a political figure that may have committed some crimes, but like, and I'm not dismissing the crimes that Trump's being accused of, but I mean, it's one thing if you're saying, I want to get elected so I can go after El Chapo. It's a different sort of situation if you're going after a guy who's just a racist, misogynistic asshole who manipulates money for his own financial gain, right? Like there's a fundamental difference between those two people, no matter how much you dislike Trump. And so to campaign on the idea of going after a U.S. citizen, right, or a citizen of your state or what have you, because it feels like you don't like him politically, like that's ugly, but it doesn't change the fact that we have these indictments from Alvin Bragg. It looks like there's merit behind them. And if that's the case, then Trump you do need to go after him, right? Like that is messy, but like you said, it's following the law. So by following the law, it gets you to Trump likely did these things that are illegal, and so we're going to go after him. And then Trump makes it even worse by suing Michael Cohen, alleging that Michael Cohen broke attorney-client privilege. And so if that's true, then what you're saying is you wanted him to do these things that he's alleging. You don't want him to talk about them. And the things that he's alleging are illegal. So then, again, that punts the attorney-client privilege. But Trump made this mess that we're talking about right now, like it's wholly made from him, starting with what he wanted Michael Cohen to do dealing with Stormy Daniels, and then leading all the way up to him deciding, I'm going to shut Michael Cohen up by suing him for $500 million. Like I mean, this is like a fucking situation with Dr. Evil, right? Like it couldn't be that.
$1 billion. So you brought up El Chapo. I thought of Al Capone and John Gotti. And it's funny to me that when we're thinking about Donald Trump, we're thinking about high-level organized crime figures.
Yes.
But that's not unfair.
No, I mean, look, I mean, you look at who he surrounded himself with, and you look at how he operates his businesses, right? Like, this is just objective. And where I get frustrated with a lot of Trump supporters, right? Before Trump went, Obama's not American and I want to see his birth certificate. Before that, Trump was a joke, right? To everybody, left, right, whatever, right? Like people, he was a joke. He bankrupts Atlantic City, constantly, multiple bankruptcies, multiple marriages. The guy was literally like he was a buffoon.
Yes,
right. WWF
and Obama making fun of him at the
right. I mean, he was getting roasted.
Yep.
Right. I mean, he literally got roasted on Comedy Central.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a whole thing. His show, like, I mean, his show was popular, but having a popular, stupid show on TV, I mean, the bar isn't that high. I mean, you've got The Bachelor and The Bachelorette and Survivor and, you know, hip-hop Hollywood Wives and all this other bullshit. So, I mean, it's not hard to get a really dumb show on TV that gets a lot of ratings. But Trump was a fucking joke to these people that are now supporting him just because he's saying the things that they want him to say. And looking at this whole criminal enterprise possibility, and then him literally making his own situation worse by trying to use this organized, like this mob boss mentality of, you know, don't, you know, shut up or you're going to pay. But instead of a physical violent threat, it's I'm going to sue you for so much money that you'll, you know, be broke forever. It's just, it's infuriating. You know, I mean, from a legal standpoint, from a political standpoint, and yet, I mean, there's a world where he's still the GOP nominee, right? Like, I still stand behind my support of DeSantis, but he could absolutely be the Republican Party representative for president in 2024, even with all this shit going on.
This is where we're in the surreal zone. I was thinking about this the other day. I was in Buffalo for, you know, see some family and do some stuff. And I'm listening, like, trying to navigate away from political talk with family because that part of the family is very right-wing. And my uncle has his Trump 2024 hat on the top of the refrigerator. And I'm like, all right, I'm just steering away from all this nonsense. At the same time, Steve, it's not a possibility. It's a probability.
Yeah.
I mean, he is, as of right now, the guy who, and it's so fucking wild that a guy whose legacy is, I'm a thrice married porn star banging, you know, con man, convicted con or charged con man, and that's the president.
Well, I mean, like, people, you got Trump University and Trump wine and all this other bullshit. Like, there's plenty of, like, I mean, his track record is what it is, but yet and still, like, he's a viable candidate for president of the United States because of the people that support him. Right? As much as people don't, I don't like him. I don't want to see him in that position. But there's enough people out there that support and back his rhetoric, right? And who have put him on this pedestal of a demigod who can do no wrong, and anyone who says anything about him is, you know, anti whatever,
right.
is
hates America,
is a race, is a, you know, a treasonous, anti-patriot, racist against white people, raging communist, right? Like, it's insane.
Oh, and you brought up George Soros, and no one who says that name even knows who George Soros is. The neighborhood we're in, we're a couple miles apart. There was a Trump rally the other day of one person. There was one person.
It can't be a rally with one person.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Steve, it's funny you mentioned that earlier.
Sad.
I didn't think it about.
It was almost sad.
No, Jim. It was sad, right? Like, it was sad.
It was hilarious.
One chubby old lady with a Trump
2024 flag
on the corner on the west side of Cleveland. Like, come on,
Rocky River, Lorraine, baby.
I mean, like that in and of itself is just sad.
It was pathetic. Oh my god, it was so bad. All right, moving on because I want.
But that's his base. You know,
well,
I mean, that's also not a strong argument about his base. But, you know, they're at Trump's peak. We've been over there, and
there were 50 people there.
Right, there were 50, you know, maybe more, just all on all four corners of the corner, right, with signs and flags, wearing, you know, literally wearing the American flag, you know, pants and shirts, and screaming at cars and like, I mean, it was crazy. And now it's just that one lone survivor.
Yep.
You know, but I also think we're a year and a half away from the election. You know, a lot of this stuff won't really start to clear up and pick up until we get to that 1 year mark. You know, like once you get to
November of 23,
right,
should be.
You know, pre-Thanksgiving, we're a year away from the election. You know, kind of at the height of football season, then a lot of this stuff will start to ramp up. But moving on.
Yes.
So there's two big stories, and these can go in either way. But first, we'll start with the Tennessee legislature. So, state of Tennessee, they had that brutal mass shooting where the trans girl goes in, her trans guy or the trans person goes in and shoots the teacher, shoots the kids. The police are there, in 10 minutes, and they take out the suspect. And, just a terrible scene. It was like 3 kids under the age of 9, and 3 longtime teachers. And it was a religious private school, and it set off a firestorm about private religious schools. It set off a firestorm about trans people. And those are, the standard identity politics sort of stuff. But it did raise the question of gun safety again. And it really set off a lot of people in the state of Tennessee. And there were calls like, hey, let's do something about gun control. Let's do something, so we can stop these mass shootings, especially in schools. And, there were protests at the Capitol there in Tennessee. And it led 3 state representatives in Tennessee to go out and protest. They had bullhorns and they were, screaming for gun control in their state, and with the people who elected them and put them in office. And the majority Republican-led legislature there in Tennessee said, "All right, well, if you guys are going to go against the script and go out there and protest for gun control, then we're going to expel you." Now, what they said was that they were inciting a riot because they had a bullhorn, right? Like, that's the technicality. But the reality is that you had 3 reps that were Democrats that were saying, look, we got to do something. We're going to join the people. And it made the rest of the legislature look bad. 2 of the members were black. There was 1 white woman. And they ultimately voted to expel Justin Pearson and Justin Jones from the Tennessee legislature, right? Like, so they actually vote and successfully expel them. Now, they end up reinstating them. But that in and of itself creates a firestorm because you've got 2 black representatives and a white woman who's also a representative that go out and protest. The 2 black people get expelled. The white woman doesn't. And then they say, well, it's because, one of the black guys had a bullhorn and the other black guy was really closely associated with him. And, she didn't have a bullhorn, so she gets to stay. Obviously, everyone's like, this is clearly about race. This is clearly about, the gun lobby versus the anti-gun lobby. And it's full partisan bullshit. So the Tennessee media decides to get involved and say, look, all right, if you're expelling them for, technically the use of a bullhorn and everything else, let's look and see what you guys have going on. And when the media pulled the curtain back on the Tennessee legislature, all sorts of hell broke loose, right? Like, so you've got this one legislator who he's having an affair, right? Which, okay, fine, not that big of a deal. But he's got a house in Nashville, right? And the capital of Tennessee is Nashville.
Right.
But he's got a condo like 75 miles away in another city, right? So these legislatures get a per diem if they live like based off of where they live in relation to the capital. Well, his is, it's an hour plus away. So he was getting this massive per diem for going to, Cottonsville, whatever, Nashville. But he has like a $600,000 home in Nashville. His kid is enrolled in school in Nashville, and like his per diem should be a quarter of what it is. So what they did was, since 21, like his per diem like collection is like $92,000. But that's because he's basing it off of saying that he lives an hour and a half away. Well, if he was in Tennessee, it would be like $10,000. Right, like, so you've got lying and reporting on where you're living and all this other shit, but then you throw in this affair that he's having with this other woman, and it may be an inappropriate relationship because of her role in the state. Like, it's a whole mess. Then you got this other guy, right, who in his previous life, before he was a legislator, was a doctor, right? Well, this doctor admits that he was illegally prescribing opioids to his nurse. His nurse that he was dating. His nurse that he was dating, that was his second cousin.
Okay.
And
so is there a problem here?
One other thing. The second cousin nurse was also admitted that she would use a strap-on the doctor.
All right, you just buried the lead, you son of a bitch. You didn't bring that up at all, and I apologize to your mother for calling you a son of a bitch. But you buried the lead on that.
Now, her using a strap-on on him...
It's really irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
It's very irrelevant. But
it's fun for you to throw in there,
the fact you
feel good? Do you feel good?
I feel fantastic about it. Because the fact that it made its way into the record is just... I don't even know how they got there. Right? I think because she purchased it, maybe with money that he gave her... And
there
whatever.
Are so many
Either
things
way.
To go there. Anyway,
but the state of Tennessee is a mess right now, and
Tennessee doesn't get the credit they deserve for being amongst
garbage.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when you say racist state, Mississippi comes up, Louisiana comes up,
Georgia,
Alabama.
Right.
Tennessee, Oklahoma. Missouri, they kind of skate, and they shouldn't because they're gross.
No. Yeah.
So we're with you there, Tennessee. You are gross as a state. You're welcome.
You get the official stamp of grossness from Whiskey
Congress podcast.
But I just thought that was interesting, right? Like, so that's born out of you've got this tragic event of this shooting, and you've got representatives doing what's right and calling for change and calling for something to be done. Now, that's not me shifting my stance on gun control and everything else, because I think a lot of the gun control measures that are put out there aren't as reasonable as people say they are. But I still think that we do need to look at some issues and address them, and I think that representatives fighting for that is worthwhile, and for them to be expelled, but you only expel the black people who do it. So you've got this unwillingness to address this really bad issue in terms of violence, and then you've got the history of racism in the state of Tennessee, and then you've got this particular action that seems like it's based on race and political going down political lines, and then all of that ends up exposing just the dirt of all these other representatives that is much grosser than a couple guys yelling into a bullhorn about change for the good.
And I think you and I we've had this conversation, I think, on the show and offline. Give me a reasonable gun control law, and I'm all for it. I just don't know what that is. Because,
it's what does it look like? And my concern is, I just on its face, the gun control argument I have issues with. Because, and I've gone through this on the show multiple times, but you have the same people who will tell me as a black man that white nationalism is on the rise, that extreme, white extremism is on the rise. You've got these domestic terrorists, and they're based out of white supremacist thought and everything else. So you're telling me all that's on the rise. You're telling me that some of these white supremacists are amongst our police. You're telling me that the police aren't here to protect me. You're telling me that the police are killing unarmed black men at a disproportionate rate to other people. You're telling me that the police aren't here to protect me, that they're here to protect property. You're telling me that they're not going to patrol my neighborhoods and people who look like me. They're not going to patrol them with the same sort of concept of keeping the people safe that they would in the suburban neighborhoods. You're going to tell me that the response time is going to be slow, right? Which, it doesn't matter where you are. If you have to call the police, they have to get there, and it's an issue across the country with slow response times from the police. You're telling me that you've got the police department saying that they're underfunded, and that they need more people and they need more manpower and they need more to fight crime. Then we know that the crime numbers are on the rise, right? So you're telling me all these sort of things, right? And then you're telling me that you want me to then give you my guns, right? You want to take them away from me and restrict my access to them and leave the people that you're telling me are basically out to get me. Just leave the guns with them because they'll keep you safe. Right, that's my. It's the contradiction, right? You're telling me that the people who are supposed to keep me safe have it out against me, can't keep me safe, aren't good at their job, need more training, right? Are overzealous to kill people who look like me. You're also telling me that they don't do a great job of protecting me, even if they aren't racist, because they're understaffed and everything else. You wanted to fund them. They're saying they don't have enough funding, and that's who you want to protect me? Fuck that. Let me choose the weapon to protect myself and let me do it if that's what's going on with them. Right? Like, and then you also have the issue with gun registries and, like whether you're Democrat or Republican, it's like, do you trust the government to have access to this information so that they can pick and choose, right, who to take weapons from and who that they can go after, right? Like, there's a lot of issues with this idea and concept of gun control that are broader than just, oh, yeah, I like guns, right? Like, we're talking about freedoms, and you can think, well, the founders didn't intend this and this, and they weren't predicting semi-automatic weapons and everything else. And you could argue about the language, but as we understand it, the citizens of the United States have a right that's given in the Constitution to bear arms that shall not be infringed. And once you start taking away rights, things that are in the Constitution, because this particular group doesn't like the outcome of that particular thing, right? And you start taking rights away, then there's a progression that could absolutely happen where more and more of your rights are stripped away and taken away and restricted, right? Like and I don't think that is a conspiracy theorist thought, right? Like the way the two sides in this country, conservative, progressive, Republican, Democrat, are fighting for power and are willing to do whatever it takes to shut the other side up. If you don't think like me, if you're not with me, then you're against me. That mentality is fucking dangerous. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, both these sides are trying to take rights away from people. It's just the rights that they're taking away are different.
So I will push back on the shall not be infringed. You're leaving out the whole regulated militia aspect of the Second Amendment.
I mean, we can have that argument.
We can. I mean, and probably go on. You want? And then the other big issue is now related to abortion, and that being quote unquote a right that's taken away. And when we get down that road, it's an ugly discussion. And when people don't acknowledge that, it bothers me. It's like, look, abortion is a bad thing. No one is Yahoo about that. Now, there are people who will say, and anyone who's black and white on that issue, I have a problem with. Because if you think abortion is murder, no exception, I'm like, okay, you're ignoring some really ugly stuff. And if you say, oh, it should be a right for a woman to choose up to 8 months and 29 days, I'm like, okay, that's kind of gross too.
Although, to me, I mean, like, so, the abortion issue, like, you're right. Anyone, if you're black and white, like, it can't be a black and white issue. It's not yes or no or good or bad, right? Like, you've got rape, you've got incest, you've got just the age of the victim, you've got viability of the child, threat to the mother's life. There's all these different aspects to it and nuance that complicate it to where there's not just a simple, direct, easy answer, and that's a hard conversation. But the right you're talking about is less about the actual abortion issue, and it's the concept of body autonomy, right? And controlling specifically women's bodies and how they're treated in a medical setting. And that's disturbing, the fact that the aggression of which conservatives and the rights and the Republicans are going after that particular aspect of body autonomy, right? Like the people of small government.
And that's the issue you and I have been steering away from for the entirety of our show. And
someone told me once that, oh, well, that's a cop-out. And it's just like, look, I got that too. And like, look, if you want to talk about, which we're doing it right now, I think now you don't have a choice because you have to speak for it. But I just, again, my issue with the conservative movement attacking abortion the way they have for the last 30 years, right? If not longer, 40, 50 years going after that is, again, this like you're the side, you're the party of small government. You're the party of, freedom of movement and freedom of this and that and everything else. but you are attacking a fundamental right of a person in their freedom to deal with their own personal body, right? Same thing when they go after LGBTQ and everything else, right? Like, I have my issues with some of the trans stuff that happens, but again, the shit they do doesn't hurt me, so I don't want them to be hurt. I don't want them to be targeted. I don't want trans people to be like made even to larger pariahs than they already feel. And so again, my issue, I feel, is consistent. It's leave our rights alone. Allow the people to, allow people to make decisions for themselves. Allow people to express themselves the way that they want without government interference, right? The issues with guns, like there are other ways to attack these issues and with these shootings. Now, people are saying, like, well, Europe doesn't have this problem and Canada doesn't have these problems. All these other these nations that ban guns don't have the problems that the U.S. does. And you're absolutely right. And yes, it is because we have so many guns. But that is also the reason why you can't go back, right? New Zealand did it and Australia did it. We aren't Australia or New Zealand. Right? Australia, New Zealand, like the population in Canada, you could take all of those and put them in the U.S. and still have room for plenty. Right? We are much bigger. We are different. We've had guns all along. We've got more fucking guns than people. You don't put that toothpaste back in the tube. Right? And your gun law, it's like, it may reduce some. It may help some. And so if it's going to help a little bit, then it's worth doing. Not if it's going to cost people their rights, that then gives the other party that you don't like a pathway to take away more of your rights. Because then they'll go back and forth to the next thing you know, you are living in a society where the government controls every particular aspect of your life that you have no control over. Right? That's not a conspiracy theory. These people are human and they're greedy, power hungry, driven by control. And you have to push back against that. And I'm sorry that we have this epidemic of gun violence. It's fucking terrible. But the alternative, to me, is much, much worse. Because then we all end up essentially as slaves. And the history of my family tells me that that's not great. So I'm willing to fight the fight that we're fighting now and go forward free than to go towards a future where we end up enslaved to ourselves, essentially. Anyway, that's my TED Talk.
All right. Brought to you by Steve. No, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, again, I am willing to listen to discussions. If you say to me registration of every firearm is a step in the right direction, I'm open to that conversation. Definitely background checks. Absolutely open to that conversation. That's in existence now. With loopholes. The loophole is private citizen sales, right? Yes.
But you can't like, how are you going to regulate that, right? I mean, it's
I don't know.
That's the issue.
I don't know, but
like private citizen sales is an issue, but okay, fine. But we do have these, like, everywhere you go, you have to fill out, and I can't remember the ATF form that you have to fill out, but. Like, that's required. That's federal law. Like, you can't, like, it doesn't matter where you go, right? I was just in the Carolinas, right? I popped into a couple gun shops, and while I was there was a guy buying a gun, filling out the ATF form in South Carolina and North Carolina, right? In Ohio, West Virginia, everywhere you go, you have to fill these forms out. So if people are going into a gun store and they're...
But that's a store with an FFL, a Federal Firearms License. So they have to do that.
Yes.
If I sell to you... I can tell you from personal experience.
But I just acknowledge that person-to-person sales. Yeah, but even at gun shows now, they still have to fill out those ATF forms, right? Like, that loophole is like the loophole that they're talking. The gun show loophole. Now, look,
I haven't been to a gun show in 10 years.
If I take a gun to a gun show, right, and I leave it in my truck, and I see you walking around, and you're looking at the same gun that's in my truck, and I watch the situation, they slide you the ATF form, and you're like, I don't want to do all that stuff. And they're like, yeah, that's the rule. And then I follow you and say, hey, buddy, I got the same AR-15 in my trunk. You ain't got to go through all that bullshit with the federal forms with me. that there is an issue and that's a loophole. But, going to a gun show doesn't remove the fact that you still have to go through the federal forms, right? Like, and people are going to be, I saw this guy go into a store and buy a gun and he didn't have to fill out any forms. Then that store is operating illegally, right? And that store is the problem. It's not the state law, because the laws are what they are. You cannot legally buy a firearm, right, from an FFL dealer without filling out the ATF whatever form. You just can't.
True.
No matter what state.
But you can find someone who is not.
Right. Now, if you've got some, but again, if you've got someone.
I have purchased firearms under those circumstances.
Yes, I have too, because there's not a law against person-to-person sales. So
Correct.
If you want to change that, like, the only issue that I have, again, is that, like, that forces some sort of registry on it. And once you have a registry and you have access, like, that just, to me, is where things get dangerous, right? And people who really aren't, like, if you don't own a gun, or you're not, maybe you have one, it was given to you or handed down or whatever, you don't have a strong opinion on guns, you're just like, registry isn't a bad thing, we register our cars and everything else. But it's, like, just guns are different. And the idea of the government having that much knowledge and that much access, it just, like, all the shit we're dealing with these politicians, like, you made a reference to George Santos earlier, right? Like, do you, I mean...
Well, I think you made a reference.
Right, but either way, like, our confidence in these people that we have in government isn't high, right? It's just not. And that's a lot of where my issue is, right? And it shouldn't be. Right? Like, so do you really want those people, like, if Trump is president again, do you want him and his administration having access to a fucking gun registry? Right? It's just like, you said something about us that we didn't like on Twitter. Oddly enough, we're coming to take your guns, and now you can't defend yourself. Yeah, I mean, just think this through.
That seems paranoid to me, but...
Does it?
It does. It does.
You really think that that's going that far?
No, I didn't say that far.
Okay.
That seems like one step beyond.
And you know what? I will tell you. Yeah, it is paranoid. But what's the difference of paranoia? It doesn't necessarily, because being paranoid doesn't mean that it's not real. Like, it doesn't mean that the threat isn't there. So,
fair.
I mean, like, look, I didn't intend on this going down a gun control conversation. And like I said, I'm open to certain things, but I think we need to look at bigger picture and the potential risk and harm that comes from it and weigh it out. And if you're willing to say, like, I'm willing to sacrifice this freedom, right, then, and you've got other people who aren't willing to sacrifice that freedom, then what happens when there's a freedom that you do find relatively important, that you do support, that you do want to keep, but the other side wants to take it from you, but you can't get the support from the other people because you didn't support them when their particular freedom that they were fighting for was stripped from them, right? And that's and nobody wants to look at it that way. And I'm a paranoid, like, I look, you're slipping into conspiracy theory. But when you look at the people that we have in government, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Those are the people that you have in government. Those are the people that you want controlling your records, who has access to weapons, everything else. Like, I get that they're crazy and we don't want them to have guns, but like think about the amount of control and access that you're giving to these people that they already think about what they already have, and think about what more you're willing to give up to them. And does that really make sense to you? You really want Marjorie Taylor Greene having that type of access and control? Like, come on.
I mean, you're pushing the right buttons with my girl MTG. Let's be all right.
We can
let's move on. Let's move on.
Let's move on to something less controversial and talk about the Supreme Court.
Go ahead. It's on you. All right. I'm just like throwing the lob up right now. It's on you.
So, Clarence Thomas, the man, the myth, the legend. He got himself in some shit over a long period of time. He didn't just step in it. Like, this is a collected effort. He's got what he calls a close family friend who happens to be a billionaire named Harlan Crow out of Texas.
By the way, is there a whiter name ever?
I mean, I think
it was John Stewart last week.
This dude has
got the whitest name ever. Like, Harlan Crow.
The first time I heard it, I pictured a guy with white hair and a white suit, right, with a cane. Like, it's just like, Harlan Crow to your service. But Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas, apparently really good friends. Harlan Crow being a billionaire, for years has been, flying Clarence and Ginny around the world on his private jet, taking them on his yacht, even going so far as to buying a property that Clarence Thomas' family owned, in which Clarence Thomas was like a 30% owner of, purchasing it from Clarence Thomas for some unknown reason. And none of this was disclosed, right? The property was not disclosed that Harlan Crow purchased from his family. The trips around the world on the private jets weren't disclosed. The yacht trips, the yacht trips, I teeter on just because, all right, what if it was just like a little shitty fishing boat, right? Like, what if Harlan took him out, as the boat gets bigger,
have you
that's
seen
when
the boat?
No, I have seen the boat and it's amazing, right? But I mean, it's just like where does bringing someone on your boat cross the line politically, right? Like from a political finance campaign reporting standpoint,
seems like a Wolf of Wall Street argument.
No, but think about it. Think about the boats over on Lake Erie right now, up at Whiskey Island. Sure. Okay. So if
there's 25-foot.
If I go out
fishing,
right? So if I invite Mary Captor onto my 24-foot boat, right? Is you know what I mean? And
versus a 55-foot yacht.
Hold on, just get off the idea of how big and fantastic the other boat is, right? But if I just got a 24-foot boat that's maybe got an underdeck cabin, and I take Mary Captor, and I just say it because she's the rep
Marcy
here.
Captor, yeah.
Marcy, sorry. And I take her out on my boat and we go fishing and we come back, right? Is that something that she needs to report? Right? And that's I don't know the answer to that question. And if not, then what's the line of I went on someone's boat and I need to report it? Now, obviously, a boat half the size of a football field is probably something that you're going to need to report, right? I get that, but mine is more of a what's the cutoff for report? Like if it's a rowboat,
that's fair,
right? Like if I just got a rowboat and I'm like, hey, Marcy, Marcy, come out on my rowboat. Is anyone making a big deal? No one gives a shit, right? I'm just wondering what size of boat triggers the you got to report it factor. Now, look, I'm not even defending Clarence Thomas on this. That's just a curiosity question, but private, flying on a private jet, out of the country, across the country, whatever. That's and Clarence Thomas knows better. He knows that what he's doing is fucked up, right? He knows that his excuse for this is bullshit, right? The question is, what are they going to do about it, right? John Roberts, it's your Supreme Court. What are you going to do about it? Congress, what are you going to do about it? Right? Are you going to impeach it? Actually, I don't know who impeaches a Supreme Court justice. I don't know if that's the Senate or Congress, but legislature. I don't know. I mean, it's just so rare. I mean, I get as a lawyer, I'm supposed to know all the rules and all the laws. I don't.
I would defer to you on this.
Right. So you got to go to someone who got a higher grade point average in law school than I did.
You were sick that day.
But look, it's an ugly scene for Thomas, but I don't have a lot of faith that anything comes of this. And something should. Right? And people are trying to be like, oh, they're just friends. That's what friends do. Look, I don't give a shit. Right? One friend is a Supreme Court Justice of the United States. Another friend is a billionaire. Right? We know about reporting and finance reporting, and you have to report benefits and gifts. Hell, I work for the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority, and I had to report gifts over $25 fucking dollars. I got a $50 gift card from one of our general contractors, and I reported it. I put it on a form and submitted it and had to report it because that's the fucking rule, right? And if I don't, then if anyone finds out, then Channel 19 and Carl Monday are up my ass for taking gifts, right?
Well, you're kind of a baller, Steve.
But just think about that. I reported a $50 gift card from a general contractor to Home Depot.
All right, want me to talk about? I want to be an asshole,
but
and I'm much better to be an asshole than you.
But Clarence Thomas, who is a Supreme Court justice, right? So he went to law school. I went to law school. And I'm not saying that I'm nearly as smart or as accomplished as Clarence Thomas, but right. if my background tells me that I need to report a $50 gift card from a general contractor that we work with from Home Depot, then I cannot imagine that Clarence Thomas just thought that it was okay that he hopped on this plane and flew to fucking Milan with Harlan Crow and his family, right? Without reporting it. You can do it all fucking day, but you have to disclose it, right? And then when you talk about this dude is a billionaire and he's got multiple businesses and things that are directly impacted by, you know, American domestic and foreign policy in situations where Supreme Court decisions could directly impact his business, right? Which is another thing that we know that those situations have come up. Then Clarence Thomas has an obligation, right? Has an obligation by the bench that he sits on and the robe that he wears to report these interactions. Right? You're not a criminal for doing it. You're a criminal for not fucking reporting it. And the question remains, what happens to Clarence Thomas because of this? Does John Roberts step up and do his job? You know, and I should know, again, whoever impeaches Supreme Court justices, like, they need to step up and do their job, right? And figure out what, and is it, you know, impeachment? Is it some sort of censure? But something needs to happen, an action. It needs to be relatively severe. And the question is, will it?
Well, I mean, if we're betting on this, we both are going to bet no, nothing will happen. Now, having said that, this is a potentially huge swing on the Supreme Court. I mean,
let's not go down there.
Right?
We don't even have anyone like acknowledging what happened, right? Like John Roberts, from what I've seen, John Roberts hasn't said anything. We don't have, you know, we've got some moderate commentary coming from, where's Merrick Garland? Like, come on now, I'm not ready to.
Right now, the court is basically 6-3, right, in terms of conservative Democrat or conservative liberal.
But
you flip it to 5-4.
You're putting the cart before the horse. We can't go there yet, right? We don't even know. No one's even where are we at in terms of even the possibility of an investigation, right? Like, this is coming out of a news report, right? So I'm not going. I don't want to entertain this could flip the court, not flip the court, but it could get another progressive on the court. Hold on, right? We don't even know if this is going to get to a position where we're even talking about an impeachment, right?
Oh, I think at this point we have no reason to believe there will be, but
then that's insane to talk about it happening.
But the impact is potentially huge.
I mean, let's see if there's even
a movement
towards some form of sanction before we start talking about, a 30-year sitting Supreme Court justice being removed. I don't think it's that far to say let's hold off on that conversation just yet.
No, I'm not even disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that is ultimately the potential culmination of that issue.
Yeah, that's where it could end, but you need so many dominoes to fall.
All right, we're going to go on over an hour if we're not careful, and I really want to talk about two things. One of them is what I don't want to talk about is the Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama it's just so bizarre, and it's hard, right? So the one thing we didn't talk about, and we can actually wrap these things together somehow. I'll make it work. So the Dalai Lama. So the not the Dan Snyder thing, this other thing. So the Dalai Lama stuck his tongue out at a kid, and told the kid to suck his tongue, and that's fucking gross.
Yes,
right.
Okay.
Just
we're on the same
gross.
page there. Yes,
and then. His people came out and they're like, well, he's playful. He gets, it borderlines on flirtatious. It's normal. Sorry, he went a little bit overboard. I didn't like the explanation at all. I don't everything about this is gross. I don't know what you do to punish the Dalai Lama. I don't know enough about really the Dalai Lama to begin with. So I don't know. It's a weird story. Now, conservatives are saying that, the Dalai Lama made fun of Trump and, is about peace and equality and everything else. So the conservative right wing is making the Dalai Lama like a political progressive left figure. And the big movement right now on the political conservative right is to talk about grooming children and, pedophiles. And if you're, progressive left, then you support child grooming and pedophilia. And so they're really going after the Dalai Lama in that vein, much like they're going after the trans community for being, groomers and pedophiles and everything else. Which brings us to, you're going to like how I did this, Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney ends up getting a deal with Bud Light, or Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch.
Well done. No, good job.
And so so Anheuser-Busch does like a promotion with Dylan Mulvaney, puts her face on a can, and she does this social media thing drinking Bud Light, and it lit the conservative right on fire to the point where they did their standard, we're boycotting you by taking the beer that we already bought and dumping it because we're
shooting it
or running it over, which, you and I are in the same place on this. Once you pay for it
so much.
Once you pay for it, you are no longer doing damage to the company. Like, you're not doing damage. You never were. But, like conservatives en masse, like dropped buying Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser, Bud Light, everything else, as a protest against this promotion with this trans person, Dylan Mulvaney, and it set off the whole firestorm about the trans argument, going back to the Nashville shooting because that person was trans, and it really just created this really just gross firestorm, and showing people's homophobia, transphobia, all their sexual phobias and gender phobias. It's interesting because sales dropped for Anheuser-Busch, because of this. And yet their stock price actually didn't suffer all that much. And even, at points kind of saw some pretty big jumps. And, predictably, or not predictably, over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, when this happens, whether it's Nike or, pick a company that, allegedly went woke and then went broke, according to conservatives, even the NFL, like when you look at their numbers.
Yeti.
Right, yeah, like all their numbers, like, people talk about, well, when Dick stopped selling guns, their stock price dropped. Like, it did, but that was years ago. And if you look at their stock price now, it's 3 times as high as it was then. So if anybody rode out the wave of the whole Dick's stop selling guns thing, then they're pretty happy with their investment in Dick's Sporting Goods. Same thing with Nike. Everybody lost their shit over Nike and Colin Kaepernick and everything else. Well, if you look at the stock price of Nike right now, then you're probably pretty happy, right? Same with their revenue and everything else. And you could talk about the NFL. NFL breaking record numbers, right, based off of just these ridiculous TV contracts and everything else. And, people, the conservative right complained about them being, woke, and then they were going to break them because of their boycott. And Breitbart tried their hardest. Like, they would show the stadiums before games or after game. Like, look how empty the stadium is. Like, that was halftime, douchebag, or that was pregame, dickweed. And, the NFL, like them, love them, hate them, whatever, they're kicking ass, taking names when it comes to revenue and profits. So we'll see what happens with Anheuser-Busch. I suspect their stock price will continue to go up. Their sales will rebound. I'm sure you will get a flood of people coming in and buying, Anheuser-Busch products as a, anti-protest, right, to the conservative right. That'll sort of buoy Anheuser-Busch's sales. But it's just interesting, and I didn't want to leave that out because it was a big topic of conversation.
Well, and the alcoholic beverage landscape has changed because seltzers have become a huge, and I don't know which one is Budweiser or Anheuser-Busch's. I don't know if it's long drink or whatever, but the market has shifted. And frankly, Bud Light is a beer that was designed for women.
Well,
sorry.
Look, I think you're speaking to a broader issue that I think a lot of these conservatives don't know. Exactly. Anheuser-Busch and InBev, they're massive, right? They're
huge,
one of the largest, alcohol distributors in the world. And so there are so many brands under that umbrella that most of these people that are doing all this ranting and raving don't even realize when they switch from one and they go to this or that or whatever, that they're still Anheuser-Busch, it's still in bed. Now there are some, now the beer snobs in the world, right? The hipsters.
I'm a beer snob.
The hipsters and the IPA people are.
That's me.
But you're not a brewer, right? Like, I mean, you homebrew, but you don't sell beer.
Correct.
Right? Those that do have jumped into this argument saying, we'll give you a list of all the brands that are Anheuser-Busch to make sure that you don't drink any of that transphobe beer, right? Or that trans whatever beer, whatever. Right. But here's a list of all of our extra hoppy IPA beers that you can enjoy that aren't affiliated with the trans movement, right? Like, and they're taking advantage of this, which is interesting because
I have not come across that.
Well, and like I've seen, it's all over like social media. Like you see these different distilleries and breweries jumping in.
We ain't woke. We're
right, exactly.
Is it really?
Yeah, like going. Okay.
Look, I'm not doubting you for a second.
No, I mean, you can go out there and find it, but right, like we're we're not woke, and you can come and you can drink our beer.
You handle our social media, so
which the interesting thing about that is that a lot of what built the microbrew community and all that other stuff were a lot of these sort of hipsters that were very progressive. And, so I think
I just get made fun for not having long enough beard to be a true brewer,
right? Or not having a man bun and all that other shit.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, but anyway,
let's move on to Daniel Snyder because I do want to wrap this up. But my boy Daniel Snyder, how the fuck can you teach a guy a lesson better than just giving him $6 billion?
Well, technically $5 billion because he paid $800 million for the team originally, sold it for $6 billion.
I stand corrected.
Sold it for $6 billion, and people are like, well, he's got minority owners, so he's not getting all of $6 billion. Like, okay, whatever his percentage of the $800 million was, he's getting 5 times whatever that percentage is, and that's his punishment for being a garbage owner. Right? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, and people are just like, well, you don't understand. There's only 32 teams and it's a private club. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know what? You know what's also a private club is going from being a billionaire, single digits, to a double-digit billionaire. There's even fewer people in that fucking club. So, like, this guy goes from one club to another, and I'm sorry, I don't see where the loss is, other than now he's got to buy tickets to games if he wants to go see them, which I'm pretty sure Daniel Snyder no longer gives a fuck about the NFL because he just made $6 billion or $3 billion or whatever the fuck he made off this sell. Right? The guy was a garbage owner. He was a garbage human for the most of the duration of the time in which he owned the Washington Redskins, now Commanders, and his punishment is a cool $6 billion check to go fuck off.
I have nothing to respond to on that.
I mean, it's just like, here's the
thing. We taught this guy lessons.
And I don't know what the fucking right answer is, right? Like, I'm not saying the guy should be drawn and quartered for his behavior and what he allowed to go on under his watch. It's not a defense of him that he should keep his team. And it's not, I don't know what the right answer is, right? But it's just fucked up that you run this organization this way to the point where all the other owners and the league says you are toxic for us to be around and to be a part of our club. You must go for your bad behavior. And with that comes this check for this amount of money. Like, it's just crazy. Now,
I wish I had a punch back.
And there's just like, and I don't know what to say about it, right? Like, and I'm sure there's someone out there who'll say, "Oh, it's because of capitalism." Yeah, I guess, but pipe down, right? Like, we're not ending capitalism because Dan Snyder got richer, right? It's just that one was a little bit of a gut punch, and it didn't hit me until I saw the sale price. Right, I was just like, "This is good. He needs to sell the team. He's a dick. He hasn't really ran the team."
So we had this conversation on this show when you said,
like,
you kicked out of this.
You do, and then, but it's just
party boy club.
You look at it, and it's like this dude made again $800 million, sells it for $6 billion. Like, dude made $5+ billion off this. Like
you said, even if you only get a quarter of that, that's billions, of dollars.
And then that goes to, like I said, the NFL kicking ass and taking names, right?
You
Like,
know,
the
Steve,
teams
I
are
think you're acknowledging the fact that America is done with the NFL. They're not.
right. Like, think about
here,
it. You got 32 teams, right? And let's say, on average, the 32 teams are worth, we'll say, $4 billion.
So the Bills sold for $1.4 billion like 10 years ago.
That was then. That was 10 years. That was a decade
10 years ago. Yeah.
Right.
No,
And the
no,
TV contracts aren't what the TV contracts now are insane.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just pointing out $1.4 billion was a big deal. The Broncos sell last year for like $4 billion. I think you and I got into a back and forth on the show about how $4 billion was insane for the. Oh my God! It was. I want to say it was the Broncos, but it could have been a different team. And now the. Commanders.
Like, collectively, you're talking like again on average.
Billions.
On average, if the average is now $4 billion a team, right? Then you're looking at a league that it's got a value of $140 billion.
You know what? I'm not remembering what we argued about. It was the Milwaukee Bucks sold for $4 billion.
Yeah,
and I said.
No way.
No way. Well, no, I didn't say no way because it happened.
Yeah.
I was just like, that's insane to me that a basketball franchise in Milwaukee would sell for 3 times what an NFL franchise sold for. In Buffalo, I'll grant you that. But Milwaukee and Buffalo are essentially similar sized markets.
Yeah.
I don't feel good.
Well, no, I mean, just no. But, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between the two teams, or cities,
and I would think an NFL team would have way more street value.
Yeah, but you have to look at because, and the reason why is you've got less overhead with an NBA team, right? Right, like you're paying fewer players, right? Like even though there's like you pay a lot fewer players. Like the arenas are smaller. Like everything is smaller.
40 home games rather than
Like so
8.
You've got less overhead in terms of like actual labor, right? But you still have these other big residual values in terms of like marketing, branding, the actual real estate that the property's on, and all that other stuff. The naming rights. You still have these massive TV contracts, right? Because like the NBA, you have a lot of games, so you don't it doesn't have the same sort of fanfare.
You're right,
but like you still have massive TV contracts. You've got all the like I said, the marketing, the merchandise, and arguably the NBA is bigger globally. Than the NFL.
Not even arguably.
Right?
No doubtly.
It is. Like, the NFL is massive and number one in the U.S., but around the world, the NBA is bigger. So even though Milwaukee is Milwaukee, there are people all around the world who like Giannis, right? Who love Giannis and, who buy his jerseys from Greece and Africa and China and everywhere else, not to mention the NBA's relationship with China. And, again, Milwaukee is if it's not just Milwaukee. That vertical goes all the way up and out because they have fans everywhere all over the world. The value of that one franchise is going to be a lot higher, right? And there's other things in there in terms of revenue, and how they're able to sort of their numbers are depreciated or inflated based off of various contracts and things like that. These NBA teams again have a lot of value. There's only 32 teams, or there's only 32 of them, or whatever.
Around 30. Yeah.
But they're a massive draw on a lot of different levels, and so the value is just crazy high. And
I'm not arguing with anything you're saying, and in fact, it would be stupid for me to argue because you just stated facts. Having said that, the NFL team.
That being said, I'm going to. Anyway.
Yes, the Bills sold for a third of what the Milwaukee Bucks did 10 years later,
but. And the question is, if the Pagulas?
Yeah.
If they were to sell the Bills today, then
I have no idea.
If they were,
would it be six? Washington just sold for $6 billion.
Right.
That was the discussion started.
I would argue that Buffalo right now is probably closer to $4 or $5 billion.
You're probably right.
The Pagulas could probably make a fuck ton of money if they wanted to. And I doubt that they do. Why would they? Right? By
the way, do you know the story of Kim Pagula? Well, she had a heart attack and literally got resuscitated as DeMar Hamlin.
Right.
And
she's not doing well. If I
no, she was fighting for life. Although she's on the recovery. And I would do one.
Yeah, but this is a while ago, and she's, I read a story, and I meant to forward it to you. This is probably about a month ago that she's not like that. It's kind of sad. Like she's just not the same person. Because I had read stories prior to her incident.
Her daughter is like a world-class tennis player.
But
she put a story out and said,
all I'm trying to say is that the woman is very impressive. You're trying to tell me about this damn tennis player in high school.
No.
But no, I mean, it's great for her daughter, but Kim Pagula in and of herself, like, has a very impressive resume and has been a strong figure as a part of the ownership group and ownership team, has been a leadership about a number of different diversity initiatives and everything else. But because of this medical incident, she is not the same woman. She doesn't have the same energy. I don't know how well she's speaking because I think there was a stroke involved as well.
Yeah,
and so I'm just saying like that. It's just a sad situation. And it's crazy because, Damar Hamlin gets hit, heart stops, gets resuscitated, comes back, may play again. Right, but she's also an older woman, and it was a completely different sort of situation. But just showing like the contrast there is unfortunate.
All right, we should wrap this up.
Wrap it up, B.
We are at Whiskey Congress on Instagram and Twitter, and we're done. Later. Wrap it up.